Hey, WordSesh. Good morning, and thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm actually remote today down in Mobile, Alabama, my hometown, helping my parents move. So I'm not in my usual place, but I'm here, and I'm excited to be with y'all this morning to talk about innovation and the future of WordPress. I have my old school notes that I'm going to use to talk about innovation. Thanks for Barry and Scott for having a great presentation at the last hour, and I hope I can follow that. Bear with me and ask questions if you have them, and I'll get to them as well as I can. And yeah, so let's get started. All right, so we're talking big picture stuff, innovation, and the future of WordPress. And we need to know, what the heck does that mean? And in short, we have one challenge that is more important and a bigger deal than anything else. And that is that WordPress must continuously become both more powerful and easier to use at the same time. And doing so continuously is an incredible challenge that is at the core of WordPress's future success. So there are several things that we can do here. One of the added challenges to saying, oh, WordPress needs to become more powerful and easier to use at the same time is that the goalposts for what that means in terms of how powerful it must be and in terms of how easy it must be to use, those goalposts are constantly moving. So we have to continuously adapt and adjust our game plan to fit the challenges and the competition in the marketplace. One of the examples that I like to use is that WordPress, when it first came out, it was viewed as a blogging platform, a little later on as a content management system, and people were like, man, this thing's awesome because it's easy to use, it works so well, it's easy to install, it's easy to update. And as time has moved on, like those same things, even if they haven't changed very much, they've gone from being easy to use and easy to update to hard to use to hard to update, because we're comparing it not to Drupal and Joomla, but we're comparing it to Medium or even Twitter and Instagram and basically anywhere else that you can publish content. So WordPress is having to constantly keep up with the latest and greatest if it wants to be the future of the web and the future hub of the web. So that is a great challenge that we must deal with, and we must always reset our expectations to make sure that we're aligned with where we want to be with the broader web. At a very purely granular standpoint, take this all the way down to, say, you're creating a new piece of content in WordPress. It takes what, on a bigger install, it might take 4, 5, 6 seconds to load the add new post page or to save your initial draft. Why would someone do that if they can go and they can add an image on Instagram in just half a second with very little wait time? Or if they can rip off a tweet storm with no barrier to entry whatsoever. So we have to convince people that WordPress and a central hub of information, the home for their digital life, is a desirable place to publish. And it can't be a desirable place to publish if it's so much harder in comparison to the latest tools, especially social tools, that it's challenged against. So we can't have 5-second page loads for people's blogs and their content. We can't have these barriers to entry where once you log in, you create this experience where there are 200 possible links that you can click. That's just way too much going on. So the WordPress administrative experience, the creative experience, needs to be significantly simpler while maintaining its power and flexibility for people that are looking for more than the ability to post a simple update or a tweet length thing. So what we are hoping to do is to enable both scenarios. So now let's get a little more granular, okay? So one of the things that I think we'll see in terms of the future of WordPress is that the admin will become a single page application. I think that's just part of the deal. that you need to be able to navigate the various pages, your list of content, your draft content, create new content, go visit your profile page. These needs to be seamless administrative loading experiences, and that's got to be part of the future. There are certainly a lot of things that make it difficult, but we shouldn't be challenged by a goal because of code and level of difficulty that it is to accomplish it. We need to be unified by the common goal, and it requires a big enough group of people within the core community to say, this is a big deal, this is something that we need, let's make it happen. And, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, and I actually think it's fortunately, it's not easy to make that change, but it doesn't mean that change can't happen. I've been thinking a lot recently about how progress in the open source software world has some degree of similarity to the way good government should work. So if you think of good government in a democratic system, let's act like it's an ideal system, okay? And you're in the U.S. and progress is slow, and there's checks and balances, and you have a legislative branch, and an executive branch, and a judicial branch that are playing off each other, keeping one another accountable, and it is a slow journey, and that's a good thing because you're preventing too radical of elements from taking over, but over time, you have these small wins and these small wins and these small wins, and you end up with better government. And in the open source world, it's very open, it's very democratic in an ideal sense, but you still have people leading, and you have this progress that should be, it shouldn't be rapid. Experimentation should be rapid, just like if you have new bills in committee or whatever in government, and all analogies fail, so hang with me. But you should be able to gradually form some progress. And it's not so bad if your wins are small in the short run, but when you add those up over the lifetime of a project, 13 years right now for WordPress, and 20, 30, 40, 50 to go, who knows what, those wins add up and it becomes big progress. But that shouldn't prevent us from experimenting. And we shouldn't be afraid just because something is hard. So right now, one of the challenges that we have in WordPress is the standard writing experience. There are multiple things going on where people are experimenting and creating new things, but they're fragmented. And we don't know which one we want to be yet. We don't know which one users are going to prefer. And I'm speaking of the customizer, which is especially getting a lot of attention right now. The default editor, which it has its pros and cons, but it's been getting a lot of work, and there's been a lot of progress on that front. And it's not something that we should, just throw at the wayside, because it frustrates us sometimes, because overall it's got so much that's good about it. And then there's also the front end editing experience, which a lot of people have clamored for, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's always progressing, and there's a lot of challenges that you have to deal with. But at some point, we do have to decide what's the easiest way for us to move forward to enable people to update and create content. And that the battle between those three experiences is a big one right now. But the future of WordPress is about making that experience better, and that might include one or more of those techniques. It's 8 a.m. here, so I'm going to take my coffee breaks, if you don't mind, every now and then. So another thing that's part of the future of WordPress, and that's going to require some additional innovation, is the potential decoupling of various parts, or maybe pretty much the whole of the user experience in WordPress. That could be, for some people, it could be the front end. They want to do templating in something else. They just want to use the back end of WordPress because it has great accessibility, or compared to some other content management systems with great power, it may be simpler. Other people may decouple the back end but keep the front end because the back end isn't simple enough for them. And this just highlights the fact that different people want different parts of WordPress. And other people may decouple both and use WordPress purely as a data store, where the website doesn't look anything like WordPress, but the person that created this platform or experience, they're taking advantage of WordPress and everything that you get with that, between users and various pieces of content, the ability to easily prototype and all these things. And they use WordPress as the data store, but not, the actual front end or the back end components of it. They're just grabbing data out of that. Of course, I'm like a broken record. In order to be this, it requires the REST API to function. So obviously, the future of WordPress does include the REST API, whether that's in its current form or a slightly altered form. We will see the API hit WordPress eventually. I do think it's for the good of the platform that it comes in sooner than later. We've already seen an uptake in adoption in terms of the infrastructure, and it doesn't mean that every plugin or whatever has to utilize that infrastructure, but we've seen powerful plugins use the base of the infrastructure for good things within their own little ecosystems. And the endpoints coming into WordPress will be important for enabling more powerful usage of WordPress, where WordPress can be more of the data store and people can create their own unique experiences. That said, if we are going to be the hub of the web, if we want WordPress to be someone's central home as their digital footprint, we have to be good at it. So that means the data store itself has to be good. And in some ways, like take, for example, metadata right now at scale doesn't always work that great. There are situations where it can fail. The arbitrariness of custom fields can cause a lot of headaches in terms of what to expect and how to process that data. So there are projects like the Fields API, the Customizer API has just recently made some progress with this about being able to determine what kind of content was going to be in those fields. Those are important projects to be able to enable developers to set standards for what type of content WordPress should expect, and therefore be able to sanitize that, validate that data so that it can be useful moving forward. Another thing is, for a long time, we really loved putting things in posts, because then you got all of the stuff that you can work with posts as free ways to manipulate that data from a theming standpoint or whatever else. And then a lot of plugins, especially look at some of the e-commerce plugins that really started to scale, like Easy Digital Downloads or WooCommerce. They all of a sudden realized, like, oh my God, reporting orders using custom post types and metadata is a total disaster. It does not scale, etc. And they are making this difficult but important shift to moving data to its own appropriate structure. Why this is important to the future of WordPress is because that requires lower level APIs in WordPress to be able to establish what that structure is going to be. And there's some good tools here, but there's certainly a lot more support that WordPress can have in terms of enabling developers to use the base of WordPress, the built-in stuff, but also extend WordPress, but still be a part of it, and be able to build a platform that can handle other things, like e-commerce orders or whatever else you might put in custom tables and have custom APIs for. We can create an infrastructure of tools within WordPress to help enable people to put that type of information into their projects in a scalable and also an easy to use way for developers that are going to interact with that content. And it's important for us to improve the, I don't know what you call it, the PR of WordPress, or the importance of your own domain. Again, this is around WordPress being your central data store. That doesn't just mean for applications, that means for human beings. So it is one thing for, say, a big publisher to use WordPress as their central hub of their API, and then they distribute to social channels or InDesign or Medium or who knows what. It's a whole different thing for us to make people's own domain, their own WordPress website, their central hub for their life. So it would be nice if we could make WordPress a central hub for me. If I post a picture of my kid, that I put that in WordPress first, and that's an easy experience. And then I deliver that same picture to Instagram or to Facebook or to Twitter or to wherever my friends and family are going to consume that content. But the overall integrity of that data is safer with my WordPress database. And I certainly would love that, because I trust my own domain and my own hosting more than I trust these multi-billion-dollar startups where you just don't know what's going to happen. So, for example, Instagram does this really great right now. It's actually pretty annoying, because if I take a picture, Instagram makes it pretty easy to put that picture on Instagram and then go check, 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 and deliver this off to these other places where I have relationships and people prefer to consume that picture in their own way. I would much rather that be from WordPress, but WordPress right now, especially from a mobile standpoint, makes that quite difficult. And we want to enable people to both utilize WordPress because it's a better long-term move, that you're going to be able to retain this data for the long term. And side note, I think the whole disappearing data in 24 hours thing that's popular in a lot of social networks right now, I think that's just about as trendy as Square Photos were. And I actually think it's the network that's delivering these platforms much more power than something gimmicky like expiring photos. So I think in the long term, we actually have an advantage in WordPress for the historical preservation that we have with our data and with our information. And so WordPress has to be good at doing these things, and it needs to be cool to have your own domain. I want Krogsgard.com to be the place that people go during my life and after my death, and that's the preservation of your life. I've been really enjoying reading biographies recently, and one of the things that I noticed is people had really documented their lives through letters and journals for a long time. And the blog is an extension. I hope I don't die soon. Thanks, guys. But the blog is really an extension of this type of documentation. It's something within us that wants to preserve our experiences for those around us to be able to share in and to be able to experience with us. And people for generations did this through letters, through their own journals, and they documented their lives. And then, now that allows me 100 years after Teddy Roosevelt's death to read a 3-part biography, in large part powered by his own documentation of his life and also his friends and those people around him that wrote about him. And we need WordPress and your own domain and historical preservation of your own domain and your own content and your own life, which right now we're really whoring out to a lot of social channels, and we don't know the future of those social channels. We need that to be preserved, and we need it to be neat, a good idea that people want to preserve those things on their own domain. So that's a marketing and a PR challenge. And of course, the technology of WordPress itself has to be good enough to be able to live up to that promise. Okay. So now we are in this situation where we're trying to be someone's central hub. Unfortunately, right now, the user experience in WordPress kind of sucks. It's got its pros. It's good for some people compared to some applications. But overall, if you've watched someone, a new user especially, onboarding especially, so that's multiple things. There's user experience, there's new user experience, and then there's new user experience, like a brand new user. And we have to make sure that we both have a great default onboarding experience with WordPress, but we also need to enable people to build great onboarding experiences with WordPress. So right now, if you register for WordPress, that's one thing that's challenging. But you just pop in and you get to the dashboard and you see mine and Sarah and Jeffro and Matt's stupid blog posts. You see a quick draft thing. You see all these goofy things in the dashboard that really shouldn't be there. Where is our step-by-step guide towards getting to know your WordPress website and a proper onboarding experience that's going to make someone's introduction to WordPress a positive experience? There are people that study this. Useronboarding.com is a really good one. where he walks through and he just like obliterates these user onboarding experiences. And if he did WordPress, he would probably just abandon the whole experience when you compare it to a lot of the competition out there. So we really need to both equip the default WordPress one, but also we need to empower developers and application builders to be able to make the onboarding experience better for their own customers and whoever's using their products. Coffee break. All right. Packaged WordPress. This is an idea that is not new, but right now there's a lot of fragmentation in terms of someone says, I want to build a real estate website. And you go to Theme Forest or wherever and you say, here's my real estate theme, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're getting all the functionality that you need. And what we need to be able to do is create packages of functionality that doesn't put the burden on the user to say, here are the plugins and the themes and whatever pieces of the pie that I need to build WordPress to fit my scenario. I think there's a lot of value in people pre-preparing those packages. And whether you do that as a consulting bit or like kind of a plug and play thing, I don't know. But I think we need to both have the technical ability to support that. And an example of something that kind of is already on that track is the way you can favorite plugins and themes, and then from the admin you can go and you can get all of those. So you basically have a site template that includes code already, but we need to expand that and make that broader so that people can more easily create these packages of code, whether it's the theme or the plugins or both or one or whatever, to where they can easily help people configure a website to a certain scenario. And I think that that's something that we really have to work on because there's currently so much fragmentation. You got to go to 5 different commercial websites. You have to go to WordPress.org. You have to go to GitHub. You have to go to all these places. And for the average person, it's pretty difficult to create a great experience. The future of WordPress, I hope we all know by now, but it's also international. More than half of all new WordPress installs are not in English. There has been a ton of incredible progress. I think if you look at translate.wordpress.org, it really shows some of what is possible. And I think WordPress 4.6 shipped with 50 languages, 100% translated for WordPress. And the Polyglots team is one that is really already doing the type of innovation that I hope to see in the rest of WordPress. But it doesn't mean that it's done, because it's one thing to support a lot of languages for the core of WordPress, but we need to make sure that developers and people building additional products for WordPress are thinking about the international user experience, people that don't speak English as a first language. We need to ensure that we're supporting them as well. And that goes for lots of elements. It could be the technical implementation of internationalization, or it could be the way that we use slang in our products. I'm perfectly guilty of this. I literally have a WP Y'all shirt on right now. And, you know, Southern English is a little difficult if that's all I give in terms of my delivery of my content. But we need to think about the same thing with the delivery of the language that we're providing with our plugins and themes. We need to make sure that it's more of a proper English, and that we're also both working as hard as we can to translate stuff ourselves with people that are professionally equipped to do that, and also enabling translators that are ready and willing to play that role with your product, that we're enabling them to do so. And the efforts with the Polyglots team is, they are admirable in terms of how they're making that happen. If you've never gone to translate.wordpress.org, do so. Okay. The future of WordPress needs to be mobile first. I'm not speaking in terms of the front end of WordPress. That's been the case for a long time. But we need to consider the fact that people's interactions with the web are not going to be majority desktop. they're going to be majority mobile. And they're probably already that for most people in terms of consumption especially. But if you look at the networks that people are sharing on and creating content on, a lot of that is mobile first content creation. So the mobile experience needs to be our priority in terms of the admin experience and the site management experience. And it may not just be through the WordPress native admin. It could be through custom administration experiences, third-party applications. We need to make sure that all of those have the tools that they need from the core of WordPress in order to create great mobile experiences for people that are creating content. The future of WordPress also includes the better understanding of what it means to design for the majority. This is a tenet of the WordPress's philosophy. We need to, we say features need to be good for the majority. And we need to be careful about whether we're assuming that means that a feature is used by the majority versus a feature being beneficial to the majority. Because there are a lot of things in WordPress that are valiant efforts that may not be used by the majority of people. But that doesn't mean that they're not good for the majority of people, because there are some things that are more eccentric or minority use cases, but it equips a smaller group of people to create experiences with WordPress that are outstanding for the majority. So we need to be careful about how we talk about good for the majority and make sure that we're not pigeonholing every feature into this scenario where it has to be used by the majority, but just good for them. That goes for developer features, for and for all sorts of other use cases. Okay, another coffee break. The future of WordPress includes hosting. Hosting is one of those things, I think a lot of people within the WordPress community look at it as much as a burden and something that has to be dealt with, more so than an industry that can be a partner for WordPress. Certainly, the hosting industry has taken note of WordPress. You can't capture 25% of the web and not pay attention to this if your whole job is to host the web. So hosts are paying attention to WordPress, and hosting is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is a really, really big deal. And they are paying attention to WordPress. They're paying attention to what we're doing, and we need to utilize hosts as a partner. That goes in a lot of directions. One could be data. These hosts, a lot of them can capture outstanding data about how their customers are using WordPress, and they can inform us of how to make better decisions and make those decisions data-centric. And I think that's super important, and we need to keep those lines of communication extremely open, and we need to invite members of the hosting community into the WordPress community. And that also enables us to have important conversations with them about things like why it matters to update software in the underlying stack so that WordPress can do more important things and or better things in terms of the code base. Obviously, newer versions of PHP enable more than older versions of PHP. So that's an example of working with the hosts and having an open, honest, and serious relationship is extremely important. Hosts also have evolving technology. This is what I would call like the Amazon push. Amazon is making a ludicrous amount of money. I think their last quarterly report was something like $3 or $4 billion of profit. That's profit, not revenue, off of Amazon Web Services. And Amazon is pushing that whole industry forward. And it's doing so from the basis of technology and the ease of adoption for their product. And other hosts, to keep up, are having to either mirror those experiences or build things on Amazon's platform themselves. And WordPress gets a lot of benefit from that because we get to adopt better reliability for our websites, We get to adopt more uptime. We get a lot of things that are really powerful for us to make WordPress better. And in turn, hosts are understanding too that their infrastructure and the layer of protection that they put around WordPress also makes WordPress better, and therefore improves their customer support experiences, reduces their customer support costs if, for instance, WordPress sites aren't getting hacked, or people aren't having major problems doing things like installing plugins or whatever the scenario might be. And the hosts have a ton of benefit from being more committed to WordPress. And another thing that we've seen is that hosts are able to make more money on managed products that utilize WordPress. So managed hosting is a higher revenue product for hosting companies, and they obviously see that. And therefore, managed products are going to be something that they focus on. But hosts and WordPress people don't have to be at odds. They can be partners, and we need to be working closely with hosts and be open to hosts and not antagonize them. And we will also see more consolidation in the hosting market. This is something that I've really been paying a lot of attention to recently. It used to be that there were lots and lots of long tail hosts, and there still are. But a lot of the medium-sized hosts, we've already seen a pattern of them getting acquired by EIG, who owns Bluehost and HostGator, or GoDaddy or something like that. And so if you heard of a hosting company being bought, you just questioned, hey, is this from EIG or GoDaddy? And obviously that makes them extremely important players in our market. But they won't be the last ones to come into the market. Private equity is paying attention to hosting. If you saw the acquisition of Liquid Web last year, and then Liquid Web, aka that same private equity firm, ended up acquiring Rackspace's cloud division. There's a lot of WordPress websites there, and that gives that host a significant amount of potential power in terms of WordPress, and it becomes another person, another company, big company that we need to be paying attention to and working with. And they won't be the last ones. So we might have some of these really big companies that we have to be working closely with as they consolidate. The future of WordPress is not just in hosting, but it's also about being hosted. So that means unique hosted WordPress experiences around certain types of applications and catered to one certain type of user. This is something that I've been wanting to see more and more of for so long, and either the people doing it are being very quiet because they don't want competition, or it may not be happening because it's a little too difficult. So an example of that, the one that I've used for years, was Happy Tables and Restaurant Engine, creating catered experiences for hosting websites where the user signs up and they don't have to deal with all the drama. It's really difficult. It's a difficult business plan, but it doesn't make it a bad one. Where it's difficult is user acquisition in a hosted environment is pretty difficult. It's pretty expensive, and it's a long process. And some of the ones we've seen with restaurants and hotels, and some of those that have been public, those are businesses that don't have a lot of money. So it's difficult to convince them to pay a significant amount of money that is going to help you make a lot of profit. But what if we were doing this for creating hosted experiences for lawyers, which have unique needs, or for dentists, which have unique needs, or for construction, which have unique needs? And if we get into other industries with hosted products that are themselves multi-billion-dollar industries, and people serious about their web presence, or should be and could be convinced of the importance of their web presence, and we're creating catered hosted experiences for them. And I think that goes well beyond a niche theme. It should involve an entire niche experience. And I want to see, I've been preaching this for a long time, but I want to see better and more examples of hosted WordPress across a variety of industries. So if you see those, please send them to me. And one of those potential experiences is e-commerce. This is one that's been proven through WordPress competitors like Shopify and BigCommerce and others. But e-commerce itself, WordPress is gaining enormous market share because of a variety of plugins. But obviously, the one that's become dominant in the market is WooThemes, which was acquired by Automatic just over a year ago for reportedly $30 to $35 million. And I think WooCommerce is going to look like as good of an investment for Automatic as Instagram was for Facebook. I think I saw the other day Instagram's probably a $50 billion bet for Facebook, and we all thought it was ridiculous when Facebook acquired Instagram for $1 billion. I think WooCommerce has the potential to be a huge revenue generator, but it won't just be a revenue generator in its current form. I laughed at Matt Mullenweg one time when he kind of compared WooCommerce to being a, like equivalent to like WordPress 1.5. However, I think he's right, because for the most part, once you get to any form of scale or level of difficulty, WooCommerce and e-commerce in general in WordPress still isn't really that good. And there's a lot of potential benefits for people that are using hosted products in e-commerce. And they're approaching the future of WooCommerce through WooCommerce Connect, which is kind of like the Jetpackification of WooCommerce, and offloading some of the more difficult tasks. One of them is like calculating shipping on a live and dynamic basis, offloading those to the cloud. And that's a great start. However, I think that e-commerce will take a lot of different shapes in the WordPress world, and WooCommerce doesn't have to be the only one. WooCommerce could power other hosted iterations where it's not called WooCommerce. So someone could create Happy Commerce, and it runs WordPress, and it runs WooCommerce, or maybe it runs another e-commerce software, but it's a hosted version of this. And I don't know why that doesn't exist yet in any significant form, but I think it will at some time in the future. And I talked about e-commerce being difficult, especially once you get to scale. But WordPress in general, it needs to be good at scale, but it also needs to be good when it's small. And that means from a number of visitors standpoint, or number of users and the way it adapts to those scenarios, but also to just pure traffic and how WordPress is handling these different scenarios. And I don't know exactly what this looks like, but you can see sometimes when WordPress is just overwhelming. Take, for example, when you have a business website or something, and it expects so much on that website, but really the businesses have kind of the same old stuff. It's like a home page, it's an about page, their photography sucks, and they need an easy way to contact people. So sometimes simple is all people really need, and we need to equip them to have an attractive website that maintains that simplicity, both in the administrative experience and in the front-end experience. And I think Squarespace has actually tackled this quite well, where Squarespace doesn't have a lot of wonderful features, but they've really equipped smaller businesses and people using the web in a smaller way to do so easily. Out of coffee, so must be getting close to done. The future of WordPress, to some degree, always is going to rely on its relationship with WordPress.com. WordPress.com currently is not, well, Automatic in general, across their products, there's currently not necessarily great overall design if you mesh all these together. And WordPress.com itself has some of the struggles, and I think to a degree, WordPress.com is trying a little too hard to be a platform, when I think WordPress.com has a lot of potential, both for .com itself and for how it can influence WordPress self-hosted installs in the power of their potential network. I talked to Matt Mullenweg at WordCamp Europe a little bit about this, and we talked about the power of Medium's network and what Medium is doing in terms of connecting lonely and disparate posts and authors. So someone that just has one post, can they post something on Medium and get popular? The answer is yes. With WordPress.com, like, you might get 0 visitors to your blog unless you get your family and your friends, and it kind of natively works its way up there. But WordPress.com, and through Jetpack powered sites, also has the power of the potential network. And just imagine the degree of connection that people could find if they were food bloggers, or if they were blogging about customer support, or all these niches where WordPress.com actually created the network for them and helped connect them to like-minded people and empowered these WordPress.com and Jetpack-enabled sites to take advantage of that network to make WordPress as a whole be a bit more cohesive. And I think there's a lot of potential there. And I think they know this, but I'd like to see more work on that front. All right. This is my last page of notes, by the way. So the commercial ecosystem is an important part of the future of WordPress, and there's a lot of innovation to do there still. The commercial ecosystem currently is way too fragmented. I think if you get to complicated sites, for sure, you could end up buying a dozen different plugins, plus have 20 or 30 other plugins that are from various sources, plus custom development. That gets pretty difficult. Unfortunately, it's not too dissimilar of an experience even for somewhat simpler websites. So if you start we'll stick on the e-commerce example for a minute, you might need a half dozen extensions or whatever, and they might come from different sources, and that fragmentation is really challenging. But also across the board in terms of commercial WordPress, there's a bigger challenge that I've really been up in arms about recently, and that is that updates are really difficult. As hosts start to auto-update more websites, what you'll notice, even in the managed hosts that do a really good job, is they're auto-updating all the free plugins from WordPress.org, but they don't have an integration to be able to update commercial plugins. So you could have your WooCommerce install updated, or any other plugin. I'm just playing with WooCommerce as my example. And then all those commercial extensions for WooCommerce, they don't get they're not part of that update from your managed host. And we need to do work around this, because a lot of bugs and a lot of bad user experiences come from people running old software because they think they're getting automatic updates, and they're not. And commercial plugins really struggle with this. And this is where I think WordPress.org and WordPress core can come into play, and a proper updates API can actually enable both hosts and plugin authors to have a more integrated system where you can play by the rules with the commercial plugin authors with license keys and the ability to the rules that they have in place for updating the software and getting support and those types of things, but also play well with users that just need updates. And I think an integrated updates API could really help there. And, you know, some of this has been between WordPress.org and, or in terms of free stuff versus commercial stuff. And there was a pushback for many years, and some people may not even remember this, but about like the merit of commercial plugins at all, and whether they had a place in the WordPress ecosystem. And the commercial side of that argument totally won, because we can see the size of the commercial ecosystem, and some of the people that were against against the commercial ecosystem are now part of it. So we need to make sure that the commercial ecosystem is better integrated with the rest of the platform. This gets us to the future of WordPress in regards to WordPress.org and the role that WordPress.org can play in WordPress. One of the things that we've talked about in terms of the REST API is that WordPress.org might be a central broker. So in terms of authenticating and managing applications that are connecting sites, Ryan McHugh wrote a really interesting post on Post Status as a guest post about a future API and the role that a central broker can play in that. And I also like the idea of getting rid of the nomenclature that we use around the repos and start calling those registries, because while I think it's important that WordPress creates an infrastructure like it does for managing themes and plugins and code, it shouldn't be the only way. And there are a lot of tools that people are using, and it would be cool if WordPress.org was able to be a central registry, but it doesn't necessarily dictate where and how that code is utilized. So I would like to see a plugin and theme registry in the long term rather than just a theme and plugin repo. And that can also mix in with the whole concept of commercialization. And WordPress.org, it needs to maintain and continue to be a central authority and a trusted website. And what I mean by that is there needs to be enough people putting effort into WordPress.org, enough transparency around WordPress.org so that people understand the role it plays in WordPress. And right now that can be unclear sometimes. And part of that is just from a pure staffing perspective. Right now there's a meta track for WordPress.org, which is awesome. And there is a lot of openness, but that doesn't make it particularly discoverable. And there's a lot of neat stuff that can happen, I think, in terms of making WordPress.org more open, and also things that we can do to get more stakeholders than the people that work for Matt Mullenweg through Automatic or Audrey or whatever system, to get more people working on WordPress.org. And there are a lot now, but I think there's more that can be done in terms of establishing WordPress.org, not just now, but for the very long term as that central hub of WordPress. And part of that involves room for an evolved WordPress Foundation. Right now, the WordPress Foundation really plays a pretty limited role. There's not a lot that it's responsible for. And I think that the foundation can be this place, the central component where a lot more is happening. And I think that people would contribute to that, whether that's through fees or grants, or maybe third-party companies can provide staff to help with WordPress.org. Maybe it includes patronage from companies or individuals. And if you look at other foundations, you can see that the resources are pooled from a lot of different places, and it gives foundations significantly more power in terms of being able to be the central authority. And I think WordPress.org and the foundation, there's a lot of meshing and interesting stuff that could happen there. And I want to close with community. Community was the key to getting to 25% of the web for WordPress. And I'm not 100% certain that getting to 50% of the web should be our goal. I think creating excellent experiences for people using WordPress should be our primary goal. But if we do that, the road to 50% of the web and beyond is something that's quite possible. And in that scenario, WordPress might start to look like a lot of different things. And there may be these sub-communities, but I wouldn't imagine WordPress as one community bubble. But instead, I would imagine various WordPress communities, and it's already this way to a large extent, but it will be even more so. Imagine a WordPress community here, 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 all these different stakeholders, but they have this overlapping unified goal for the betterment of WordPress as a whole and the central WordPress community. And our community and our trust from our leaders and the people that are doing amazing things with WordPress and being open to new ideas and new contributors, those things are so important, and we have so much going on for us. If you look at things like this as a third-party event, between WordCamps, between a lot of the blogs that are doing stuff with WordPress, there's so much exciting stuff going on with the community, and we need to keep the community central, because I promise you that 25% of the web is not using WordPress because it's awesome code. 25% of the web are using WordPress because it's an awesome community, and the future of WordPress depends on it remaining an awesome community. That's all I have. Thanks so much.